What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today I want to share with you guys the camera settings that I use and that I feel are the best for the Canon EOS R6. So let's get into it. Alright, so first and foremost, you want to make sure you get the shot in camera as best as you can. So that means get your exposure right, your composition and your white balance, things like that. Make sure that's all correct to begin with, because you don't want to have to go into post and deal with all that, and you just want to get it right in camera first. All right, so next up, I shoot 99% of my videos in 4K 24 frames per second. Now occasionally I'll shoot in 1080p because the 1080p actually doesn't look quite bad in the R6, but if I'm trying to get the best quality, I shoot 4K. Now, if I'm going slow-mo, I usually go 4K 60, so I can still keep that 4K option. Now, there is 1080p at 120 frames per second, so if I really want that real slow-mo, then I'll go 1080p, because it still looks good, but most of the time I'm sticking around 4K 60 or 4K 24 frames per second. The next up is setting the proper shutter speed. So I use the 180-degree rule. Basically means doubling your frame rate. So since most of the time I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, I'll make my shutter speed 1/50, because that's going to give the best motion blur, make it look the most cinematic and just pleasing to the eye. And then if I'm using obviously 60 frames per second for slow motion, then I'm going to bring my shutter speed up to 1/125. And so for the ISO, I try to keep it in its base ISO, which is 400. Now, if I need to crank the ISO up, then I will, no problem. It's pretty good in low light, so you don't really get too much grain at high ISOs. But typically, I try to stay around 400 and use an ND filter while I'm outside to correct the exposure. So for the R6, I always choose to shoot in log. I don't use any other picture profile. I just shoot in log because I feel like that's what gets you the best dynamic range and the most cinematic look. And I go in post and color correct and do my color grading. So log is what I choose. And then for the color matrix, I choose neutral. All right, so that's about everything I do in camera to get the best possible image. Now the rest is all the magic happening in post. So we'll hop into Premiere and I'll show you what I do there. Alrighty, so I recently did a video on color grading and color correcting the R6 footage, but for the sake of this video, I'll do a real quick correction. So we're gonna open up our lumetri scope so I can see our waveforms right here, and we're gonna go to our tone section and we're gonna drag our blacks almost to 0, not quite, but just a little bit over 0. So I'll leave it about there, maybe just up a little bit. I don't like to crush my blacks entirely because I feel like that introduces a lot of noise. All right, so then we'll drag our whites up to where we like it. Go about there for now. Shadows, ever so slightly down. Highlights, bring it up a bit. Contrast, I'm gonna just start off there. And then exposure, I'll bring it up about 0.2, I believe. Saturation, I'll just leave it how it is. Next up, we'll go to our creative, and our sharpening, I go anywhere between 20 to 50. Typically, I go 50 because that's what looks best on YouTube, in my opinion. I know that seems kind of high for the sharpening, but I find that to look the best personally for YouTube. If I find something that seems a little bit too sharp, I'll obviously drag it down. So next up, we're gonna go to our curves, and we're gonna make a little S curve. So our top bit, we'll drag up, go about there, then bring our bottom one down to where we like it. Cool, and then I'll go up to basic correction once again, and then maybe I'll just bring up the shadows a little bit, and contrast, we leave it around there. Cool, I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go before and after. So that looks pretty good. However, I like to change the background to give it more of a teal look. So my skin has more of that orange look, and then the background will have that teal look, so that teal and orange look. So what I do for that is I go to HSL secondary, and then I will select my skin tones, select them, and we'll hit the color gray button. Looks like I selected too much, so we'll go back until it's just my skin selected. So I'm just hitting Command Z to go back. Just keep going back until it's only my skin that's selected. All right, now that my skin is selected, we'll drag this out a bit. Drag it out until we get most of my skin in the picture. We'll drag this one out a bit. Maybe back a little bit. We'll leave it at that for now. I'll blur it a little bit So we'll just bring up the blur. I'll unselect the color gray option. Make sure that looks good. Okay, so select it again, and then we're gonna select this button right here, this little switcheroo yin yang kind of button. Select that so all my skin's white. And then what I like to do is drag our little color wheel down to a teal look. So that looks about good, but the background kind of has a greenish tint, so I'll go down to tint and bring it more towards the magenta side. So get rid of that greenish look. Uncheck that box and see how that looks. Cool, I'm really liking that. That looks really good. And one last thing I do is I go to curves, and then I go down to our luma versus saturation, and I'll select these two, and I'll drag both of these sides down like this. So that's gonna make sure the blacks are completely black and the whites are completely white, so there's no color in the blacks or the whites. So boom, like that. And then we'll hit the before and after, before and after. Cool, so that looks really good. All right, so next up is the export settings. So we'll hop back into Premiere. All right, so for format, I make sure it's H.264, and then preset, I do match source high bitrate. And then we're gonna come down to our video tab down here, and then we're gonna make sure our render at maximum depth box is checked. Now, I've done a couple of videos where I haven't clicked that, and I haven't seen a huge difference. I've seen some people say actually not checking that box makes the footage look better, but I haven't experienced that. Most of the time, I like to just check that box just to be safe. So make sure that box is checked, and then for profile, we'll go uncheck that, and then we'll click high, and then level, I'm gonna change that to 5.2. Come back down to our bitrate settings. So for bitrate, typically for YouTube, I just go CBR and I go up to 100. So that'll make sure I'm getting a target bitrate of 100 megabits per second. I find that 100 is a good sweet spot. And then next up, I just hit the use maximum render quality and then export. And that's it. All right, so that was just a quick video on how I get the most out of my R6 and make my quality of my videos look the best as I can. Now, obviously, you can go further into the color correcting and color grading stuff to make your image look even better, but that's just an all-around, just general what I do for some quick videos. If this video did help you, or if you got anything out of this, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button and consider subscribing for more filmmaking tutorials and filmmaking content. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Love you guys. See you in the next one.